Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Animas Corporation, providing insulin delivery products for people living with diabetes and part of the One Touch family. And by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes with the world's first continuous glucose monitoring system that sends glucose readings directly to your compatible smart device. Live life on your own terms with Dexcom. Hey, it's Stacey. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. You know that. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, Dexcom releases a new study. How do CGMs help people with type 2? Does continuous glucose monitoring make a difference? And what does the study tell us about CGMs and type 1?
Diabetes is a disease of self-management. And when you give people access to 288 glucose readings a day, when they can see if their glucose is going up or down at a mealtime, when they can see where their glucose is and how it got there, you really open their eyes. And the benefit of that does not seem to be limited to just people who choose to use an insulin pump.
That's Tomas Walker, Director of Clinical Projects at Dexcom. I also ask about CGM use and Medicare coverage, possible changes to the Dexcom adhesive, and closed-loop systems. Plus, in our community connection, popular blogger Mindy Bartleson says she spent a lot of time trying to make diabetes look good, but that had a price, and she hit the wall of burnout pretty hard.
And I realized that a big part of that was that I never acknowledged what sucked. So it just all hit me right at once, and I was just fed up and done. So once I got through the burnout, I decided I needed to be not only honest with everybody else, but honest with myself about when it does suck.
We'll talk about Mindy's newest project, and we get into a kind of a side conversation about the untethered or poly method of using a pump and injections together. And a new segment, Shoptalk, this week featuring the Barton Center. It all starts now on Diabetes Connections. Welcome to another week of the show. I'm so glad to have you along. Lots of stuff to talk about today, as always. You can tell I get really excited about doing this week by week, can't you? Well, I'm just so glad you're here. If you're new to the show, Diabetes Connections aims to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connections from the athletes and celebrities in our community, as well as talking to healthcare companies and the technology folks who keep pushing ahead. And of course, the everyday folks, and I say that in quotes, the everyday people like you and me, frankly, dealing with type 1 diabetes in ourselves or in our families. My son was diagnosed with type 1 right before he turned 2, almost 11 years ago now, and I do not have type 1 myself. I do have a background in broadcasting. I was a local TV and radio person here in the Charlotte, North Carolina area for many years, and that's how this whole thing got started. As you'll hear today, I do have a new segment. I'm calling it Shop Talk. And basically, I'm trying to bring conference vendors, people who have exhibits at these big diabetes conferences, try to bring those people to you. These are not commercials, although, some of these people do have products, but this is a way that when I go to the large diabetes conferences, one of the best parts about it is the vendor floor where dozens and dozens of companies set up and can talk about what they do. So I wanted to bring that to you because the vast majority of people in the diabetes community don't go to the conferences. So that starts this week. And as always, let me know what you think. I love getting your feedback. The show is here for you. If you want to hear some changes, if there are other things you want to know more about, let me know. And I have to say, it's always amazing to get an email like the one I'm going to read to you where the podcast can make a difference. So let me read you something that I got just a couple of days ago. He says to call him AG. So I will. Hi, Stacey. I'm AG, a big fan of your podcast in Japan. Man, he says, I always wanted to let you know how thankful I am for the information you've shared. I was diagnosed as type 1 last December at the age of 41. I began listening to your podcast from the hospital bed in Tokyo while recovering from ketoacidosis in despair. What I love about your podcast is its upbeat energy and optimistic vibe. I particularly love the latest tech news because it makes me feel my life with diabetes will only get better. I try to avoid doom and gloom stories while being realistic, and your podcast does just that. I can't wait for the next episode. It's my treat of the week. Best, AG. I don't even know what to say. Thank you so much for sending that fabulous note. I'm thrilled that you're calling the podcast the treat of the week. It's my treat too. I love doing this. I'm so glad it helped. And man, yeah, don't be in despair with diabetes. I know I've been accused quite often of having rose-colored glasses. And, you know, I'm not really here to be a Pollyanna and tell you everything is great. But I am here as a mom of a kid with type 1 to talk about as he says, the realistic without being gloom and doom. So AG, thanks. Keep in touch. And I really appreciate that. Send me your email, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com. Love to share it on the show or, you know, just take your suggestions. Quick word now from our sponsor, from Animas. We put a lot of thought into choosing our son's Animas One-Touch insulin pump just over 10 years ago. Man, and just as much thought each time we decided to stay with Animas One-Touch. Our insurance has always covered a new pump every 4 years, so we've stayed with Animas One-Touch 3 times now. Why? Well, the product is exactly what we want out of an insulin pump. Animas One-Touch offers a choice of insulin pumps, so you can choose the one that suits your individual needs. Customer service is incredible. And Animas One-Touch pumps fit my son's very active lifestyle. To find out more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Animas, part of the One-Touch family logo. As we wrap up August here, I have one more favor to ask of you in terms of awards and nominations and that kind of stuff. Man, I feel like it's been a self-promoting summer, and sorry about that. But the We Go Health Awards, the endorsement period ends on September 1st. So I will put a link in the show notes one last time. And if you are so inclined, if you click on it and then click on you endorse me, it's a little bar under my picture. You'll see it's very easy. I would very much appreciate that. Those are patient leaders in different health communities, and the folks at We Go do a great job of getting the word out and really giving you a platform to reach more people. I'd very much like to stay on their radar. So please, if you get a chance, go over there to the show notes and just click through and endorse me. Thank you very much for the We Go Awards. I'm nominated for a couple, which is pretty crazy. This is the first time I've been involved in the We Go Awards at all. And I, of course, would like the podcast award, but you pick what you want. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's it for that, I hope. Everything else, the podcast awards that I asked you about, that it will be decided at the end of September. And the We Go Awards, they will talk more about that in the middle of October, I believe. Man. All right, so I want to share a quick story about Benny. If you have a child who's diagnosed with type 1 when they're very young, and, you know, Benny was 23 months old when he was diagnosed. We switched to a pump when he was 2.5. It's very difficult for most kids to understand what the heck is going on. You're doing these inset changes, these needles are going in them, even as adults. I mean, who likes that? It stinks. So I want to tell this story because I never in a million years thought it would change this much in terms of him doing things by himself and being so calm about it. So the other day, Benny, of course, wears the Animas Ping, which has an inset, and the Dexcom Continuous Glucose monitor, which has a separate inset. It's the sensor that goes under his skin. They're inserted basically the same way, although the inserters are very different, but a needle goes in, a needle comes out, and leaves behind, on the pump site, leaves behind a little plastic cannula. And on the Dexcom site, it leaves behind a very, very thin wire. And we do those separately. The Dexcom is FDA approved for 7 days. The Animas, we change every 2.5 to 3 days. All right. So now that you've got all that background. So we're driving to school the other day, and both of my kids go to the same school this year, which is new for us. One in high school, one in middle school, but same campus. And getting out of the house, this is only the second week of school that this story happened. It's still a scramble, and there's football gear, and then there's the textbook, and you still need a note because it's the beginning of school, whatever. So they get in the car, and I said to Benny, you're supposed to put your sensor on this morning. And I had everything in my hand. I'm like, here, take this into school and do it in school. He says, I'll do it when I get to school. I'll go right to the nurse's office. So we're getting closer to school, and he's like, I don't want to go to the nurse. I'm busy. I have this to do. I said, so just do it in the car. Like, kind of kidding. And he's like, okay. So in the moving car, my kid who would run and hide, and, we had to, I don't like to use the word bribe, we had to give an incentive to a lot of the time, did his own Dexcom in his arm. I mean, I did need to lean over and push the arm up if you're familiar with how this all works. Sometimes you need a little help, push the skin up. You're supposed to kind of like pinch the sides. And this is a terrible thing to talk about through audio. But if you have a Dexcom, you know what I mean. So he did it himself. And he got out of the car and he went. And to him, whatever, no big deal. To me, I am emotional. I'm like, how did this even happen? How did he go from, I'm telling you, man, this diabetes stuff, this is not for wimps. And I should mention that as I'm about to do the Dexcom commercial here, that Dexcom is only FDA approved for certain parts of the body. So please talk to your endocrinologist before applying your Dexcom continuous glucose monitor in a moving vehicle. All right, let me tell you a little bit more about Dexcom. We started using the Dexcom continuous glucose monitoring system almost 4 years ago when Benny had just turned 9. It was a whole new world. The Dexcom CGM system changed the way we looked at his type 1 diabetes. When you can see and track glucose levels on a screen, it's incredible. Especially if you've relied only on finger sticks for a long time like we did, it becomes so much easier to spot trends and head off extreme highs and lows. The Dexcom G5 mobile continuous monitoring system is the first FDA-approved device to let you make treatment decisions without pricking your finger. CGM-based treatment requires finger sticks for calibration, may result in hypoglycemia if calibration not performed or system's expectations do not match CGM readings. For more information, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. In just a little bit, I'm going to talk to blogger Mindy Bartleson. She's got a new project coming out. And I first met Mindy through the College Diabetes Network. But one of the cool things that Mindy talks about today, in addition to mental health and the things that she's got going on with her book project, is the idea of untethered or poly pumper on long-acting insulin. And this is something that, you really have to know what you're doing. You have to talk to your endocrinologist about how to do it and whether it's right for you. And we go into detail on it. But I think this is something that really is so interesting. And it shows how you can really personalize the technology. And that's just coming up in a little while. But I'm bringing it up now because I think that it's a good point as we lead into this study about people with type 2 diabetes who use a continuous glucose monitor. It's something that, you really can start tailoring care for the individual. So let's talk about that. All right, this is a Dexcom study and a Dexcom interview. And boy, I've already talked about Dexcom quite a bit. But Dexcom is a sponsor, as you just heard. And if you're new to the show, I like to give this kind of disclaimer when we do an interview like that. They pay for the commercial. They do not pay for the interview. Nobody from marketing checked in to see what we were talking about. I was limited on this interview for time and for scope. Tomas only had a brief window to speak to me. And, you'll hear me ask a lot of questions that frankly aren't really fair to Tomas because it's not his area of expertise, but he is fantastic. And we are already talking about another interview in a few weeks to clear up some of my questions. You'll hear he does his best of answering them, but, it wasn't really what this interview was supposed to be about. So the preparation that he had, he wanted basically to have more time to take in some of those questions and get back to me. So I promise we will make that happen. Or I promise that I will continue knocking on their door to try to make that happen. And if they don't, like you hear me say at the end of this interview, I'll track him down. Anyway, let's start out at the top. This is Tomas Walker from Dexcom about what's called the DIAMOND Study for people with type 2.
So this is the first time Dexcom has looked at this unique population, people with type 2 diabetes on multiple daily injections. And what we found was that these patients got glycemic benefit. They spent more time in range. They had less time spent hyper and hypoglycemic when they had access to the continuous glucose monitors. We were not surprised about that. However, we were really excited to see that these patients use the systems for 93% of the time at the end of 6 months. At the end of 6 months, 93% of the patients were using the systems more than 6 days a week. That was really exciting to us. We really weren't sure what to expect on that. So what we saw was that not only did these patients use it, they really benefited from it.
And let's put it in perspective if we could. Explain how they used it. In other words, was it the same as most of us in the type 1 world are familiar with? You calibrate twice a day, you see the results. This wasn't a blind thing with just physicians, right?
No, you're correct that the patients had access to the real-time continuous glucose data, because at the end of the day, patients have to manage their own diabetes. As clinicians, we give patients tools, but when they can see all that information coming in, they can see how their lunch affected their glucose, people begin to make better decisions about glucose management. So we use them exactly the same way that people with type 1 diabetes would use a continuous glucose monitor.
My experience with a lot of people who have type 2, and I'm going to throw my husband under the bus here because he does have type 2, is that he'll check his blood sugar, once a day in the morning. But he doesn't really check it unless his physician has asked him to do something else, or, right now he's off all medication, so maybe we're in a different situation. But he only checks once a day. I wonder if just checking twice a day could help lower blood sugar. In other words, those 2 calibrations. Did you guys think about that? Not to be devil's advocate, sorry.
No, we did think about that. And that's a good question, because when people have more information, they tend to make better decisions. Mm. But as part of the enrollment to this study, all of the patients had to be doing 2 or more finger sticks a day to even be allowed into the next step of the study, where they would be given access to continuous glucose monitors. So we already accounted for that confounding factor.
Oh, that's interesting. So these were people. Can you tell us anything else about the people in the study? They were checking at least twice a day?
They were checking at least twice a day. They were 25 years or older. They had type 2 diabetes. They were really the patients you would see commonly in the clinic. There wasn't anything really special or unique about them. The average age was 60 years old, plus or minus 10 years. They'd had a type 2 diabetes for an average of 18 years, and most of them were checking their blood sugars about 3 times a day coming into the study.
This would be great news for that patient group. I mean, you're talking about reductions in A1C. Can you give us kind of a range? I don't know if they would be all over the place, but was there a certain range that they came in at and then went down to?
So patients came in with an average A1C of 8.5%. So this was not terribly well-controlled diabetes. But working in a clinic with patients with type 2 diabetes, seeing a patient with an A1C of 8.5% would not be uncommon at all. Right. Unfortunately, it's probably more common than we would like to admit. However, the patients saw their A1C on average drop 0.8% after they began using CGM. So they dropped from 8.5% A1C to 7.7% A1C. And the patients really showed significant benefit on this.
Tomas, what does this mean for Dexcom? I know that you are not in the sales side of Dexcom. I don't want to put you too much on the spot on this. But it seems to me that this is a market that obviously can benefit from CGM use, but also this is a very large market. Are you all hoping that this will be the G6, or is there a timeline here you can share to get to the type 2 folks?
We've been very public in some of our discussions that the CEO has had, that Kevin Sayer has had, that we've been partnering with Google, and we've been looking closer at the type 2 market. I don't think we can commit to a timeline, but I think we're committing to the improving access to the existing technology for people who have type 2 diabetes. I think there's a lot of exciting things happening in diabetes, and I think the elimination or the reduction of finger sticks and calibration requirements will help a lot of patients as we go forward with this technology.
And let me ask you then about MDI in general and CGM use.
Sure.
That's something that is very exciting to see how it may be working out, because a lot of people on type 1, most people on type 1 use multiple daily injections and not insulin pumps. Is this study, I don't want to say, you can't really use it for people with type 1, but is it the first with MDI or just the first MDI with type 2?
So this is the first time we've looked at MDI in people with type 2 diabetes. We did the first phase of this study, which was also called the DIAMOND Study, in a cohort of 158 people with type 1 diabetes on multiple daily injections. And that was published in JAMA in February of 2017, looking at 158 patients using multiple daily injections and giving them access to continuous glucose monitoring. So it's not the first time we've looked at multiple daily injections, but it's the first time we've looked at multiple daily injections in people with type 2 diabetes.
So when you're looking at people with type 2, you mentioned that these people in the study were over the age of 60. And my mind immediately goes to the Medicare ruling that they'll cover Dexcom G5 CGM but only with receivers, right? Not for people who use the phones. So no Dexcom share. Can you speak to that at all?
This was a decision that was made at Medicare. In January of 2017, the CMS published guidelines stating that therapeutic CGM would be a new category that was covered under Medicare services. They defined a therapeutic CGM as a CGM that was accurate enough to replace finger sticks for routine decision making. Currently, the Dexcom G5 is the only CGM that meets that FDA criteria. Now, when the ruling was released, it became clear that they did not want patients using the phone. And many patients benefit from access to the share and follow features. And at Dexcom, we recognize that this could be a serious limitation to benefiting patients who want to be able to share that glucose data with a loved one who might help them avoid a hypoglycemia or a hyperglycemia or help them improve their care overall. And we have gone back to CMS and asked them to review this ruling and consider adjusting this statement either through an administrative decision or through a committee decision. And I'm happy to say that those discussions are underway, and I'm hoping for a favorable outcome very soon.
So just to, not to put too fine a point on it, but this is not a Dexcom decision. You guys would be fine. I guess it's frustrating because it's not just that they can't use the phone. It's that if they use it, their coverage will be canceled. Is that accurate?
That is essentially accurate. However, in our discussions with Medicare, it became clear that they really didn't understand the full ramifications of this decision, and they were open to modifying it to try to meet the needs of patients and families.
All right, so there's a little bit of hope there, but it's not up to Dexcom.
It's not up to Dexcom. We would prefer people use share and follow. Frankly, it's a service we're happy to offer, and we're really glad to see it benefiting patients and families and improving the care of people with diabetes.
Yeah, I find it so frustrating. I mean, just to editorialize there for a moment, it's crazy to me that they won't let you use it. But that's Medicare. Hopefully at least they're covering it at this point.
I will tell you that we are working very hard with CMS to get this adjusted because we want people to have access to this technology. The ability to share and follow data means that you can save lives.
Exactly. Okay, so let's talk about what's happening overall. Can you give us any timeline? I don't know if this is your department, Tomas, but I'll ask you anyway. Can you give us any timeline on the new inserter or the G6 coming out?
So Kevin Sayer, our CEO, has spoken very publicly that we will be going forward with our submission on Gen 6 targeting early Q4 of this year. It will be submitted to the FDA for its first evaluation.
Sure. And remind me, is the G6 submission tied to the new inserter, or is that a separate submission?
The new inserter will be part of the G6 system. Okay.
Because we're waiting for that one. We've been using Dexcom for almost 3 years, and I love it. But I'm looking forward to a new inserter.
Well, we're glad to hear that.
Yeah. Oh, well, no offense, but that inserter looks like a torture device. So, it's okay once you're used to it, but when you first look at it, it's, holy cow, how do I do this? I have a whole bunch of quick questions for you, but I'm just curious, is there anything that you feel is particularly relevant right now to the type 1 community that I haven't yet asked about?
I think that it's really good to see the first large randomized clinical trial in the first phase of the DIAMOND data showing that people who choose to use multiple daily injections will benefit from access to CGM, just like we've always seen in patients who've used insulin pump therapy. I think that's an important finding, and that's an important message to carry forward, that you can choose how to deliver your insulin and still benefit from continuous glucose monitoring.
I think that's a great point, because so many people feel that if you use a CGM, you must always be adjusting. The sugar surfing is that technique that's so popular, the dynamic glucose control, because with a pump, you can give yourself little, puffs of insulin or small doses all day long. With MDI, it seems like it wouldn't work as well. Do you have any insight as to how it does?
The fact is that people with diabetes learn to manage this disease. There's 8,760 hours in a year. A person with diabetes may spend 2 or 3 hours, maybe 4 with their clinician and their diabetes educator every year, but the rest of the time they have to learn to manage this for themselves. And we as clinicians can give them better tools, but at the end of the day, diabetes is a disease of self-management. And when you give people access to 288 glucose readings a day, when they can see if their glucose is going up or down at a mealtime, when they can see where their glucose is and how it got there, you really open their eyes. And the benefit of that does not seem to be limited to just people who choose to use an insulin pump. They can still take an extra dose of insulin if they notice that, 2 hours after lunch, I guess there was a little more carbohydrate in that taco salad than I thought. I can take an extra unit of insulin because I'm still going up. You still get that benefit.
There was a rumored report, I'll put it that way, that something had changed with the Dexcom adhesive. Blogger Carrie Sparling put on her blog, 6 Until Me, earlier this year that it seemed like the sensors that expired after August of this year didn't give her a rash, which she's had a problem for a while. Any truth to that report?
Dexcom has undertaken some quality initiatives to try to improve our manufacturing process, and we anticipate publishing some comments about these changes in the near future.
Ooh, well said.
And you know what? Patients teach us a lot about how to help them all the time, and that's something that I'm really happy about how we handle things at Dexcom. Was that we try to be responsive to our patients, and we try to learn from them how we can help them better.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, let's continue to ask these kinds of questions. Can you share anything about any of the pump companies that you're working with? I mean, I know you probably can't, but can you share anything in terms of, timelines, submissions? Everybody's so excited about hybrid closed loops, especially since Medtronic seems to be getting very good results with their system.
I think it's important you look at the definitions. When people talk about a hybrid closed loop, what they're really talking about doing is modulating the basal rate to help improve people's glucose control. What patients are really, I think, waiting for is they want the ability to have a closing of the loop. And to do that, the system is going to have to be able to deliver a bolus for a missed meal or for a miscalculated meal, things that commonly happen in living with diabetes day to day. It happens. And that is still a little bit away. I suspect we'll see the first closed loop feature sets submitted next year for CE marking and for the FDA. And as far as who is our partners we're working with, we're very public in the fact that we're working with Tandem, and we are working with Insulet, and we have been working with Animas in the past. And there is a French consortium called Diaboloop, who will probably have the first true closed loop on the market with CE mark next year in 2018.
Who is Diaboloop? Tell me more.
Well, you're going to have to go do a little homework, but they're on the internet.
I'll be happy to.
They're a French group based out of Grenoble, France, Grenoble, down along the Swiss border. This is where the French government has their national research labs, kind of think like Lawrence Livermore. And they got a strong interest in developing a closed-loop system for French patients with type 1 diabetes. They are partnered with Dexcom using our G5 sensors, and they are using the Cellnovo insulin pump, which is a French-Swiss insulin pump.
Wow. All right. We will.
Then they're running their system on an Android handset. Very impressive team of young engineers who truly decided that it was time to make this work.
That's fantastic. I will definitely be looking into that. Thanks for that info. Very cool. Anything else we should expect from Dexcom? I mean, about a year ago, the big news was, it'll be smaller. It'll be the size of an M&M. I think I'm more concerned as the mom of a kid with type 1 about accuracy. Anything to report in terms of, new information on the G6 or beyond?
So the G5 set a new bar for accuracy with an MARD consistently less than 10%, which is one of the threshold marks to be able to use the system to safely dose insulin and make treatment decisions from. At Dexcom, we are committed to maintain that level or better in all future products.
Is there anything that you'd like to add about the type 2 studies? I mean, this just to me seems as life-changing as it's been for so many people with type 1. I imagine that there will be many same results for people with type 2. It just, when you know what's going on, you can make those changes and really take ownership of it.
I would like to say that the type 2 study was really a first. No one had ever done this sort of a study, giving CGM technology, putting it in the hands of people with type 2 diabetes on multiple daily injections, and seeing if they would benefit from it. Now, we were not surprised that patients showed improved glycemic control, but we were excited to see how well they really did with it, that 93% of the patients were using it more than 6 days a week at the end of 6 months. That really shows that the patients, they liked it, they benefited from it, and they truly thought it was helping them. And one of the things that we saw in here was that those patients who are traditionally seen as the quotes around worst patients, with A1Cs of over 9, they dropped their A1C 1.4% on average. That's a profound improvement in their glucose control over 6 months. It really showed that these patients will benefit from it, and that when you give people information and some instructions on how to manage their diabetes a little bit better with that glucose information, you get better results.
That's fantastic. Just one more question before I know you have to go.
Sure.
With the only concern I have, again, as a parent of a type 1 kiddo, is that the type 2 market is so large, and there are some differences, let's be honest, about type 1 and type 2. Can you pledge for me at Dexcom you're not going to forget about the type 1s? I know we're tiny. I know you can make more money. But I know that you guys are there for us, and I just don't want to lose that.
It's an exciting time. New technologies are coming. Things are only getting better. And at Dexcom, we're really committed to improving the lives of people with diabetes. We understand the needs of the patients and the families with type 1 diabetes. And there is a core commitment at our company to help those people. And I think you will continue to see strong support from Dexcom.
Fantastic. And if I don't, I'm going to come out there to Nebraska. No, I really appreciate it. Tomas, thank you so much for joining me. More information about the actual study, I will link up the DIAMOND study in the show notes. And I'll link up the type 1 study that they did earlier in the year as well. How about that answer on the adhesive? I thought that was very interesting. No concrete answer there. That was one of the things I was talking about in the setup for the interview that we will definitely be following up on. And there were a few other points that he made that we'll be talking about again. My community connection this week is someone we've talked to before. Mindy Bartleson came to my attention as part of the College Diabetes Network, but she's moving on to a new project and writing a book. There's a Kickstarter campaign for it as well. And you can learn more about that in the show notes. But I wanted to talk to Mindy again because she is so honest about what's going on in her life, even when it's not sunshine and lollipops. And we also took a side trip and talked about Untethered, when you use the pump with injections. First, though, I asked Mindy about her project.
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, I made the decision to start writing a book with a focus on chronic illness, and I always wanted to write, but I never pictured anything beyond fiction, especially talking about my life or my chronic illnesses like type 1 diabetes, because I just thought so many other people have done it and they've done it really well, and it just wasn't an interest of mine, let alone I never thought I'd blog about my life with diabetes, and look where I am now. I blog about it all the time. So when I got more involved in diabetes, I just kind of noticed that I felt like a little bit of something was missing, specifically that all the perspectives I was hearing were either people who are researchers or medical providers, and of course they really know what they're doing, and a lot of people who've been involved for a long time. And I noticed kind of rose-colored glasses sometimes, and for teenagers that is not what is going on. It is the opposite. And I noticed it happening with myself too, because I kind of overdid it in college. Like, I went to school full time. I was in internships. I worked anywhere from 20 to almost 40 hours and was involved on campus and in the community and the diabetes community. And it was definitely too much. But after I graduated and moved to Boston and I loved my job and all the things that were going on, I was like, oh, it's totally fine that I did that. I'm not going to acknowledge it. So when I saw myself doing that, my goal was to write down all of the content, not in a format where I would publish it, just get all my thoughts down before I turned 24 so that I wouldn't have the rose-colored glasses impact my views too much, because I want to talk about that. Yes, it sucks, but you can still do it. So balancing the positive and the negative, because that's how life works, but especially in the teen years. And I think for me, that was something that was missing when I was growing up.
How old are you right now, Mindy?
I am 24 right now. I'll be 25 in November.
Okay. So it's interesting to me as a parent, because as someone who is well past 24, I think of the rose-colored glasses as being around when you're younger. But you're saying, no, you didn't want the nostalgia, like that looking back, oh, those good times we had, to cloud, the realism of your thoughts. Am I hearing that right?
Yes. So, basically I still talk about, the good times. And now as I'm getting older, I am able to look at that a little bit better, because there are moments in my life, I grew up in a very small town in the South, and diabetes was hard in a small town in the South. And so for a really long time, I was just angry about middle school and high school. But as I got further away, I was like, okay, yeah, I can separate those memories, the good and the bad. But I wanted to also make sure that I acknowledge that, there are some things that are just not fun about, growing up in general, but growing up with a chronic illness. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't just say, oh, it's fine, ignore it, because, a lot of people are not going to do that if they're in the situation right at the time.
Yeah. So I've read your blog for the last couple of years, and it's funny to hear you say that, we laughed, you wouldn't have much to say, because you have been extremely open about mental health, chronic illness. What led you to do that? Did you just feel like you had to share? Did you get good feedback?
Yeah, so when I was about to study abroad in 2013, and I was looking for resources and information and perspectives about studying abroad with a chronic illness, I couldn't find a lot. And so I decided, okay, I will do two things. I will blog about, studying abroad with diabetes, but I'll also make all of the people in my life happy because they'll know what's going on. So I thought I would do that then, and then after I studied abroad, I would stop. And shortly after I started my blog that March before I left, in May, I discovered Diabetes Blog Week, and I participated. And that's when I got a little more hooked. But I was still thinking, I'll still stop after I study abroad this summer. But people started commenting, and I started hearing from people, and they said, no, you should stay involved and keep blogging. And so I decided I would do it. And I was only acknowledging the positive, though, and I kind of did that my whole entire life. So I lied to myself and everybody else that there was anything negative involving diabetes. I thought I could only acknowledge the positive, and I got diabetes burnout for the first time my junior year of college, 2014, and it really hit me hard. It lasted about a year, and I realized that a big part of that was that I never acknowledged what sucks. So it just all hit me right at once, and I was just fed up and done. So once I got through the burnout, I decided I needed to be not only honest with everybody else, but honest with myself about when it does suck.
Yeah. Is that what brought you out of the burnout? Was it being part of the online community, or was it a realization like, hey, if I write something about this, I'm not going to, no one's coming after me?
Yeah, so it was definitely a combination of being still involved with diabetes, because I was so involved, and I was starting to become, really involved in Georgia beyond just camp. And so I saw that people were looking up to me, so I kind of powered through it, even though I most of the time didn't want to be there. And so being involved definitely helped, because I helped start the teen breakout session for JDRF Type 1 Nation in Georgia. And going to that and talking to all the teens and, hearing their experiences, was like, this is why I'm involved, and this is why I take care of my diabetes. So that helped. And then I also did do therapy, and it wasn't just for the diabetes burnout. It was for a lot of other things going on in my life. And at least for me, burnout comes when there's a bunch of other things going on. So health-wise, transition-wise, stress, I get sick with something else, and, the diabetes gets hard to manage, and then it kind of just all hits me at once.
Well, I think you are an important voice in our community. Your perspective is terrific. Your writing is great, and you're very open and honest. You've been there and done that as a young person. What about the book? So how can we help? This is a Kickstart campaign.
Yes. Also, thank you for your kind words. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So after talking with a lot of people who've written books, especially in the diabetes community, I decided to go self-publishing. And as a still somewhat recent college grad with a social work degree, I don't have a lot of money just lying around to go put that money in. And so with encouragement, I decided that I would do crowdfunding for the book. And there's a link you can go to, and it has the goal and all the information and kind of background about why I'm doing this, and also why I'm crowdfunding, and also all of the different things that you can, put money towards that you can pick for. And I do have a goal of about 4,000 to 5,000, and then a reach goal. If I get beyond that pretty quickly, my goal is to donate more of these books to diabetes camps.
Oh, that's great. Tell me about your love of diabetes camp. I mean, I follow you on social media, and you count down every year, and you post great pictures. It must be a huge part of your life.
Yeah, diabetes camp is it's a huge part of my life. It's family. So going to camp every year is like going to a family reunion. And this summer was my 17th summer, and I have a diabetes camp tattoo that I got in college, shortly after I started college. And camp has just made all of the difference for me, of course, in the diabetes aspect of life. I learned all of these things about taking care of myself and seeing people thriving with type 1 in the community, whether it was, in business, as a lawyer, as a medical professional. I saw all these very successful people, living their lives, and I looked up to them and learned a lot from them. Like I learned about Poly/Untethered, which is pump run long-acting insulin. I learned about the different pumps. I learned how do you get your pump to stay on when you're in Georgia and you're sweaty, because that's definitely something to consider, especially at camp. So I learned so much diabetes-wise, and some of my best friends, my college roommate of 2 years, I met there, and we didn't live together because of the diabetes, but we met because of the diabetes. Wow. But then there was the rest of my life too. So camp was my week to be with people who, cared about me unconditionally. And especially so, one thing I do talk about in the book is when I was 12, my dad passed away. And that whole kind of year after, everybody was walking on eggshells with me, like treating me like I was going to break and lose it. And, that I wasn't okay and I wasn't going to be okay. And it was a sad story. And when I came to camp, I got treated like I was any other kid. And so that has always stuck with me and has made a huge difference. And I love seeing the camp family grow, which is one of the reasons I'm still so involved. And I just appreciate everything camp has given me.
I'm so glad to hear that. Hey, let me talk to you about Poly. This was not planned as part of the interview, so I apologize for putting you on the spot. But I hear more and more about this, and I think it's such an interesting subject. So pumper on long-acting insulin or untethered. Can you talk a little bit about what led you to use this regimen? And I'll explain it best I can, Mindy. Feel free to jump in. But this is where you would use a long-acting insulin injected, like your Levemir or your Lantus or your Tresiba. And then you would wear an insulin pump and bolus for meals and when you need corrections. Got that right?
Yes, mostly. So one really important aspect of, using long-acting insulin with your insulin pump is to make sure that you still have insulin going through your insulin pump. So you want to do approximately 30% of your basal through your pump. Oh. So otherwise it gets occluded. If you don't have insulin going through, it gets stopped. Sure. So that's one thing that people get worried about. Yeah, and I also have a friend, as you're saying that she has a child who uses this method, and they actually do 50% through the pump because she likes, it's a teen, and the child's a teen, and they like to still be able to adjust basal rates. So they do 50% pump and 50% basal through the shots. Yeah, I also love being able to, I can fine tune because I'm very, very resistant to insulin in the morning. Like everything's doubled basically. Mm. So if I would take, pump breaks, shots would be rough in the mornings because I was going to run high because, it's hard to really fine tune, the 24 hours or the 48 hours or the 12 hours. So being able to fine tune really, helps with that because I can, up my insulin in the morning. So what led you to try this method? Yeah, so the very first time I tried it was actually at diabetes camp. My endocrinologist and nurse practitioner from the pediatric clinic I was in, they were at camp and they were kind of, asking parents, hey, do you want your kid to try this while you're at camp? Because we really like the idea of, when they disconnect from the pump to do especially water activities, not having to worry about reconnecting, otherwise their blood sugar will start going up. So that was the first time I tried it. And I didn't really look at it again until about my sophomore year of college. I think I tried it 2 years before that, not college, sorry, high school. And I was in band and theater, and in my mind, we did a lot of period type shows, and there's no insulin pump in, the 1800s. I'm not going to wear it. I refused to wear it. And then I had one show where I was on stage the entire first half. So there was no chance for me to go reconnect my pump. So I tried, poly again then, and it was really successful. So I did that during band season, all summers, and theater when I was in shows. And I would just do it on and off every now and then. I would get the Lantus and the vial with the syringe, and that's how I would do it. But then my junior year of college, so one of the other things, whenever I am in burnout, I try to spice up my diabetes routine. So I decided to take the plunge and go poly full time, and I haven't looked back because my body really does love long-acting insulin. I do a lot better when I am doing that and the pump. So, and it also really helps with my anxiety because I have really unrealistic fears of DKA, especially in the middle of the night, worried that my pump is going to fail. So having that background insulin makes me feel better. And if my pump site does fail, I still have insulin.
That's really interesting. Is that something you talk about in the book? Because when you're talking about anxiety and fears like that, I don't know how to exactly say this. I guess I'll just say what I'm thinking is that's got to be really hard with diabetes. I mean, you can't control so much of this. Yeah, and I definitely talk about how, anxiety and diabetes go back and forth, as well as, anxiety in life in general, and, anxiety in women's health, like my PCOS and endometriosis with my period. So I talk about that. So I definitely talk about poly and everything and kind of how that all relates and how I work through that. And I talk a lot about it in my blog too. Like I have a blog post called I'm a Poly Girl in a Not So Poly World, thinking to the tune of the Barbie Girl song. Sure. So, and I talk about a lot of that there as well. That's great. I forgot that's what you called it. That's right. I love it. Let's get back to the book for a second. Okay. And I appreciate you talking about poly because I know we didn't say we were going to talk about all that. Yeah. How scary is this for you? It's something so new. Definitely. So some of it feels very natural, especially because of my blog and my involvements. But I'm pretty open online and in person, but there are some things in the book that I have not talked about online because it's not an appropriate format for me to do so. So those parts are definitely very scary for me because I also talk about kind of, my family and, that's always been a little bit rocky. So those are the things that I'm mostly a little bit scared about. And I'm also, of course, the, anxiety in me / my confidence used to be very horrible and it's a lot better now, but the kind of comments of, ooh, is everybody going to hate this? So, but that's just a really small part of my fear. It's just this, admitting it out loud means this is real. I'm committing to this. I can't, just say, oh, I changed my mind now. That's right. Yeah, this is it. Who's the book for? Who do you hope finds this? So it's a combination of things. So I actually, when I first decided to write the book, I wrote like a letter to myself and everybody reading it, and I haven't touched it. So it's what I thought when I started. But part of it is a little bit for me because being able to go back and look at those things, in a very structured, I have to do this kind of context was very healing for me. And so even if it doesn't do well or it doesn't go anywhere, I was able to, work through a lot of things by writing this. And I hope that people read it and just get the sense of me too, because, I have always felt the sense of me too in the diabetes community, but there are things like mental health and women's health and things of my dad and family where I would go, well, where are the other people? So I hope that, people who live with more than one thing in their life, which is everybody, kind of benefits from this. And then maybe some people without diabetes or without chronic illness, they can kind of learn about perspectives. And I also talk about finances, so I hope that kind of breaks that barrier of talking about affordability and access and, working multiple jobs. And then I want teenagers especially to feel like there's something for them because I just always felt like when I became a teenager, I wasn't a cute little kid anymore and nobody cared. So I kind of hope that helps. And I hope some parents read it and feel a little bit better that the teen years are rough before diabetes, but if you had diabetes, it gets a little more complicated and a little more stressful. And I hope that
they can see that there's a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel and maybe understand a little more of what's going on.
I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and sharing all of this with us. And we will link it up so that everybody can find out more about how to help. But Mindy, thanks so much for joining me.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
If you'd like to learn more and help Mindy with her Kickstarter campaign, it is all linked up in the show notes. And you can get those notes wherever you're listening to the podcast on any podcast app. You can also see it in the show description at diabetes-connections.com. As I've said before, the only hard place to see the show notes is on Facebook or Twitter. If you listen to the show through the links on social media. And if that's the case, just take a trip over to diabetes-connections.com and you can see everything. Or better yet, get our app. We have an app for Apple and for Android. And I love the app. It gives you everything right there, one click, very easy. So go ahead and you get that wherever you get any other app. So new segment this week, I wanted to bring you to the vendor floor. And what this means is that at diabetes conferences, every conference, and pretty much every other kind of conference too, right? There's always an area where people can show their wares. The really big companies down to the mom and pop shops or, maybe even some volunteers, and they get to show their stuff to all of the attendees. But let's face it, most of us are not going to all of these conventions. So I wanted to bring that vendor floor to you the best that I could. So when I went to Friends for Life this summer, I tried to talk to every single exhibitor there. And this is becoming a new segment called Shoptalk, where I give the organization just a couple of minutes to explain who they are, what they do, and why it matters. So first on the Shoptalk list is the Barton Center, and here's Lindsay Charest.
Barton Center is a camp. We're up in Massachusetts. We have overnight camp programs for boys and girls. It's 2 separate camps. Camp Joslyn is our camp for boys, and Clara Barton Camp is our camp for girls. But we also do many different types of programs too. We offer day camps, family camps, an adventure program. We have a camp up in Vermont, so lots of different variety.
I feel like you guys are like the famous diabetes camp. It's been around for a long time.
It has been 85 years for Clara Barton Camp. Camp Joslyn has been around a long time as well. We recently were able to purchase Camp Joslyn through a grant. Well, recently in 2010 we did that. So now we manage both.
Keep it going. That's wonderful.
Yes.
What about the family programming that you do? Is that pretty popular?
Yeah, well, we offer quite a few different family programs throughout the year, and those are our weekend programs. So we have a caregivers weekend in September this year. That's great for grandparents, aunts, and uncles. And then in the spring, in April, we do a springtime family camp. Those are both weekend programs, but we also do a family camp in August, and that's a week-long family camp program.
What is it about camp? I know that my son goes to diabetes camp, and it's the greatest week of the year. What is it?
I think it's so great for so many kids because they are surrounded by everybody else who also has diabetes. And many of our counselors grew up going to camp, so they are instantly comforted by the fact that they're surrounded by so many peers and role models who are all going through the same thing.
What's your connection to camp?
I did not grow up going to camp. I live locally, and I started as the special events coordinator, so doing all of the fundraising events. My position has sort of grown, so I'm the associate director now, so I do all sorts of development and during donations and things like this.
All right, so every camp I've gone to, I'm a big summer camp person, has a cheer, a joke, a something. Can you give me something from Barton?
There are so many songs from Barton. I will tell you this, though. If you go to Clara Barton Camp, sit during the lunch, it's so sing-songy, so fun. But then you go to Camp Joslyn, the boys' camp, and they bang on the tables, and they have so many, they'll, sing.
But the visual of the boys banging.
It gets so loud, but it's so fun.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
I really tried to get her to sing those songs, right? If you've ever been to camp, there's a lot of singing and cheering and that sort of thing. If you have a Barton cheer, or camp cheer, diabetes camp cheer, send it to me. Like, maybe we'll share that on social media. I'll put that out there with the show this week because those are so fun. And I'd love to show that. You know, I'm a big fan of any kind of camp, and diabetes camp is just the greatest. So the Barton Center, of course, is more than just the camp programs, as you heard. More information on our first Shoptalk segmentee, I guess we can call them. Barton Center is the first one. I'll put those in the show notes so you can learn more if you are so inclined. Please make sure to sign up for our newsletter if you haven't done that as well. If you visit the homepage, it should just pop up. And every week I send that out with a link of the week, something we don't talk about here on the show, but that I think is important to our community and is just better off read rather than, hearing me talk about. There's some stuff that you just have to kind of see in front of your eyeballs, I think, rather than listening to. All right, long show today, lots going on. I love doing this, and I'm so glad that you're sticking around for all of it. Very much appreciated. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.